Leadership has been misunderstood for a long time. Most people hear the word leader and immediately picture something external, a title, a position, a stage, a corner office, or somebody with authority. And because of that, a lot of people quietly disqualify themselves before life even gives them the chance to step forward. They think leadership belongs to a certain type of person, the qualified ones, the experienced ones, the confident ones, the ones who were picked. But here's where things start to break down. Because leadership in real life doesn't wait for permission. It shows up long before anyone gives it its name. Think about it. There have been moments in your life where your presence changed the direction of a room without you even realizing it. Not because you tried to lead, but because of how you showed up. Someone worked harder because you were there. Someone stayed calmer because you didn't panic. And someone believed in themselves a little more because of something you said or didn't even realize you said. And most people never label these moments. They just move on. But those moments matter more than we think because they expose something most people miss their entire lives. Leadership isn't something you step into after you're qualified. It's something that's already been happening through you, quietly, repeatedly, long before you ever considered the word. And that's where today's episode starts to shift things. Because if leadership isn't reserved for a select few, then the real question becomes uncomfortable in the best possible way. What actually decides who gets to be a leader? Is it titles? Is it confidence? Is it permission? Is it a background? Is it success? Or is it something far more human and far more universal than most people have been told? Because if we're being honest, a lot of people walking around thinking they're not leaders have already been leading more than they realize. They just haven't called it that. So let's start there. Let's break open the first assumption, the idea that leadership belongs to a certain type of person. And once that illusion starts to fall apart, everything else starts to look very different. Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. Somewhere along the way, we were taught a very quiet lie about leadership. And we're going to talk about that here in part 1. It's not an obvious lie, not the kind that someone stands up and announces. The kind that seeps into culture slowly until everyone starts to believe it. The lie is this, that leadership belongs to certain types of people. The loud ones, the confident ones, the ones with the titles, or the ones standing in front of the room. We start to believe leadership is something reserved for a small group of people who somehow qualified for it. The CEO, the coach, the teacher, the manager, and everyone else. Well, we're just participating. But here's the problem with that belief. If people think leadership belongs to someone else, they stop looking for it inside themselves. They wait. They wait for the boss to step in. They wait for the loudest voice in the room. They wait for someone in charge to make the call. And in that waiting, something powerful gets lost. Because leadership doesn't begin with authority. It begins with impact. Leadership starts the moment one human being influences the direction, mindset, or courage of another. That can happen in a boardroom, but it can also happen in a hallway, in a text message, in a quiet conversation when someone is struggling and another person simply says, "Hey, you're not crazy. I see what you see." That moment, that's leadership. The problem is, most people don't recognize it when it's happening because We've been trained to look for leadership in the wrong places. We look for it in those titles we just talked about. But real leadership? It shows up long before anyone hands you a badge. And once you start seeing that, you begin to realize something that changes the entire conversation. Leadership isn't rare. It's everywhere. We've just been taught not to notice it. Let's now talk about the kid who doesn't realize they're leading, here in part 2. Some of the clearest examples of leadership show up long before anyone is qualified for it. They show up in schools, on teams, in friendships. And the interesting part is, most of the time, the person leading has no idea they're doing it. It's the kid who notices someone sitting alone and just naturally pulls them into the group. Not because they were told to do so, and not because it was an assignment, but because something in them couldn't ignore it. It's the teammate who stays behind after practice, not for attention and not for credit, but to help someone else get better. No announcement, no recognition, just action. It's the friend who shifts the energy in a group without even trying. When things start getting tense, they don't escalate it. They don't dominate it. They steady it. And what's wild about all of this is how invisible it feels in the moment. There's no title attached to it, no description, no authority granted. But something still changes. People adjust. People follow. People respond differently. And that's the part that most people miss. Because we were taught to look for leadership in official places. But before leadership is ever recognized, it's observed. Someone is always watching how someone else handles life. Not in a formal way. Just in the quiet, human way. We all study each other without realizing it. And sometimes, a single moment becomes a reference point. Not because it's big, but because it's real. A way somebody handled pressure. A way someone treated another person. Or a way someone showed up when it would have been easier not to. And that moment, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. Not loudly, not dramatically, but internally. And the way it shapes what someone believes is possible for themselves. Which brings us to something even more overlooked. Because if leadership is already happening this early, then it's probably happening in more places than we've been willing to admit. Let's go there next. We tend to overcomplicate what leadership looks like. Let's talk about that here in part 3, the everyday leaders we ignore. We look for it in job titles, positions, and the roles that sound important. But most of the leadership that actually holds people together never gets a label. It happens in the background of normal life. It's the parent who stays up late, even after a long day, making sure their kids feel safe before they go to sleep. Not because anyone is watching, not because they're being praised, but because responsibility shows up without asking for attention. It's the coworker who notices someone is overwhelmed and quietly steps in to help, even though it adds nothing for their job description. No announcement, no spotlight, just action. It's the friend who checks in at that exact moment that someone is about to say they're fine, but actually isn't. And instead of letting that moment pass, they pause long enough to ask one question. Not invasive, just present. And what's interesting about all of these moments is how normal they feel to the people doing them. And they don't feel like leadership in that moment. They feel like being decent human beings. But that's where things get misunderstood. Because leadership doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always come with structure or permission. Sometimes it looks exactly like everyday responsibility being taken seriously. The kind that doesn't need recognition to exist. And if you look closely enough, you start to notice something uncomfortable in the best possible way. A lot of the systems we rely upon, families, teams, workplaces, even friendships, are held together by people who never call themselves leaders. They just showed up consistently in ways that mattered. Which forces us to ask a different question. If leadership is already happening all around us in these quiet, consistent ways, then what exactly makes something leadership in the first place? because it clearly isn't the title and it clearly isn't visibility. So we need to go deeper. Let's take apart the illusion that most people still believe about what actually creates a leader. Let's go there next. There's a myth out there that authority creates leadership. And somewhere along the way, we started believing something that sounds logical, but actually isn't true. We started believing that leadership begins when someone gives you authority, when you become the manager, the director, the captain, or the CEO. And that's when people assume leadership starts. But if you look closely at how people actually behave around leaders, you'll notice something important. Authority can make people comply, but it can't make people believe in you. Authority can make someone follow instructions, but it can't make someone trust you. And that difference matters more than most people realize. Because leadership isn't the ability to control behavior, it's the ability to influence it. And those are two very important things and very different. Someone can hold the highest title in a room and still have almost no influence over the people around them. We've all seen it. The boss that everyone avoids. The manager that people stop listening to the moment they walk away. The person with authority, but no real leadership. And we've also seen the opposite. The person without a title, who people naturally look toward when things get difficult. Not because they were appointed, but because people trust how they think, or how they act, and how they treat others. That's influence. And influence doesn't arrive with a promotion. It shows up the moment people begin adjusting their behavior because of your presence, which brings us back to something important. Leadership didn't start when someone gave you the authority. It started the first time someone around you changed their behavior because of your presence. That moment might have happened years ago. You just didn't recognize it for what it was. And here's your mini challenge. For the next 24 hours, notice who people actually listen to. Not the person with the biggest title, and not the loudest voice in the room. Notice the person whose words change the energy around them. Then ask yourself one honest question. Have I ever been that person for someone else? Because if the answer is yes, you may have already stepped into leadership long before you gave it the title. In previous episodes, I talked about how leadership shows up in the quiet places. And I didn't talk about where it shows up in loud places. And so I wanted to broach that subject or topic because I thought it was a vital opportunity for me to present and share that with you. Because it does show up in places where the energy is high and people are fully engaged in that moment. Think about a concert. Thousands of people in a crowd, music blasting, lights everywhere, and then the lead singer stops the show for just a minute and says something real, something human. Maybe about unity, maybe about perseverance, maybe about checking in on people and those around you. And suddenly, the entire room shifts. Not because the person has a corporate title, but because in that moment, they use their voice to move people. You see the same thing at sports games. A coach pulls a team together and reminds them who they are when things get hard. An athlete steps forward and lifts the energy of everyone on the team. And for a moment, the noise of the arena turns into something bigger than competition. It becomes belief. You see it at conferences. You see it at rallies. You see it when a speaker steps onto a stage and says something that makes an entire room sit up a little straighter. Leadership doesn't always whisper. Sometimes leadership grabs a microphone. Sometimes it fills a stadium. And sometimes the loudest moments of leadership become the moments people remember the rest of their lives. But what makes those moments powerful isn't the spotlight. It's the intention behind the message. Because whether the room is small or whether it holds tens of thousands of people, leadership still comes down to the same thing. Someone choosing to influence the energy of the people around them. There's another place leadership shows up that people almost never talk about. Let's talk about that here in part 6, workplaces. Not the kind with fancy titles or corner offices. I'm talking about the everyday moments inside an organization where someone simply decides to care more than what their job description requires. I've seen it many times in my own day-to-day work. Someone notices a new employee who looks overwhelmed, doesn't know where they're going, doesn't even know where the bathroom is. And instead of ignoring it, they step in and help them figure things out. Not because they were told to do so, not because it was their responsibility, but because they understood something simple. When people feel supported, they perform better. Sometimes leadership looks like the person who calms down a tense moment amongst coworkers. Sometimes it's the person who keeps morale up when a team is under pressure. Sometimes it's the person who reminds everyone why the work they're doing actually matters. No title, no spotlight, just influence and presence. And the interesting thing is this: those people, they don't often think of themselves as leaders at all. They just think that they're there to be helpful. But the moment people start looking to you for stability or guidance or encouragement, you're already leading, whether you realize it or not. And here's your next mini challenge. For the next 24 hours, notice the people around you at work or your school or even in your daily routine. Who is quietly making things better for everyone else? And then ask yourself one simple question. Where might I already be doing the same thing without realizing it? Because the moment you see it, you can start using it on purpose. And that realization leads us directly into something powerful in the final part of this episode. Leadership happens when you decide it matters. Let's talk about that here in part 7. There's a moment most people don't realize exists. It's a quiet decision point. It's the moment when someone stops drifting through situations and starts deciding who they're going to be inside of themselves. Because leadership isn't something that randomly appears in people. It's actually something you choose. Not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way, but in a small, daily dose of what really matters. It's the moment you decide you're going to be the one who stays calm when everyone else is losing their heads. The moment you decide you're going to stand up for someone who isn't in the room. The moment you decide that the way people feel about interacting with you actually matters. That's when leadership begins, not when someone appoints you. When you appoint yourself responsible for the energy you bring into the space. And here's what's interesting about that decision. Once someone makes it, they almost never go back. Because when you decide that your presence matters, you start asking yourself different questions. How can I make this better? How can I help someone else succeed? How can I leave this place a little stronger than I found it? That's the shift, my friends. Leadership stops being about recognition and starts being about responsibility. And the moment someone accepts that responsibility, even quietly, they've crossed an invisible line from participant to leader. And once that line is crossed, something powerful happens. You begin to realize that leadership isn't a position waiting for someone in the future. It's a choice that becomes available every single day. Which brings us to the most important realization of all, the permission many people have been waiting for their whole lives to hear. Here's your permission moment. So today we unpack something that a lot of people misunderstand for most of their lives. Leadership. Not the version defined by titles, not the version that waits for permission, but the version that shows up in everyday life. We talked about the lie that leadership belongs to a certain type of person. We talked about the kid who doesn't realize their teammates are watching how they handle pressure. We talked about the everyday leaders we often overlook, our parents, coworkers, and friends who quietly shape the environments around them. We talked about the illusion that authority automatically makes you a leader, when in reality, titles just reveal what was already there. And we talked about leadership in loud places too, speakers, coaches, performers, and moments where someone's words or actions move a room full of people. But all of it leads to one idea. Leadership happens when you decide it matters, not when someone appoints you. When you decide the way you show up affects other people. Because leadership didn't start when someone gave you authority. It started the first time someone around you changed their behavior because of your presence, because of your influence, because you made them feel like the most important person on the planet. And once you realize that, something shifts. You stop waiting and you start choosing. Choosing how to show up, choosing the impact you leave behind, and choosing the example you set. And that realization is exactly why I do this work. If even one person listening today recognizes the leadership they already carry, then this conversation did its job. And if this episode resonated with you, help this message reach someone else. Share the episode. Leave a like. Drop a comment. Follow the show. Every bit of engagement helps this message find the people who might need it most. And as always, thanks so much for continuing to go on this journey with me. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for listening. And until next time, have a great week.